Welcome back to Capitol Tonight, a statewide look at politics. I'm Anthony Austin. It's Thursday and time to talk with the lawmakers, the ones who write the laws and policies that affect our daily lives. This week, we're joined by two members of the State House of Representatives, Charles Jeter, Republican of Mecklenburg County, and Duane Hall, Democrat of Wake County. Thank you, gentlemen, both for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Anthony.
My first question, the House debated and gave initial approval to a bill today that would make state judicial races partisan again. Judicial races were made nonpartisan back in 2004 in an attempt to take politics out of judges' races. So why is this change needed?
Well, I think Duane and I both voted against the bill, so I think we'd argue it wasn't needed. But I think a lot of my colleagues on the Republican side felt like it was about educating and giving more information to the voters and letting the voters know the partisan makeup of judges. Sometimes judges who have a partisanship one way or the other like to act like they're independent when maybe they historically have not been, which I don't have a problem with. I think anytime you give the voters more information, it's better. My concern on this was, based on our ballot access in North Carolina, if you make it partisan, you eliminate virtually any chance that an unaffiliated member or anyone from a party other than Republican or Democrat or Libertarian can ever get on the ballot. Mm-hmm. And I think that, to me, was the bridge too far for me to travel.
Well, Charles stole one of my talking points, but I'd like to start with the obvious. The reason for it was in states that have partisan judicial elections, Republicans outnumber Democrats 2-1, so that's the elephant in the room that was obvious. The part that surprised me in the floor debate was that other than the author of the bill, who had to stand up and introduce the bill, no one on that side debated. I guess no one wanted to go on record as debating for more partisanship. The reason is that the people in North Carolina have been showing overwhelmingly they don't want partisanship by how they've been registering to vote. Unaffiliated voter registration has exploded in North Carolina. The best point on the other side that really resonated with me is when someone stood up, like Representative Jeter just mentioned, and said, we usually know what they are anyway. I mean, people don't get to that point in life without a strong ideology. But there are some people that are in the middle, and we're forcing them to take a position, to take a side. And the ramifications of that, to me, is one, they stop talking to the other side. And the other, he already mentioned, it doesn't really leave a path for the unaffiliated person to run for office. You have to be a Democrat, Republican, or a Libertarian. I realize we did do it in the past, but I think it's a bad idea. We don't need to revisit. One other brief takeaway, in states where they do have partisan judicial elections, the money has just flooded in it. They've become really big dollar campaigns.
And that was going to be my next question. Do you think that this would further open up state judicial races to outside money used to influence the election?
The only thing I'd say is we've been, in the last two judicial races, we've had criticism that already exist. That all this outside money is played. You had the criticism in the Newby race. You had the criticism in the Mark Martin, Robin Hudson, not Mark Martin versus Robin Hudson, but Mark Martin, and then the Justice Hudson race in another race. So the argument that making these races partisan is going to bring in all this influx of money, I think goes against the fact that there already is this influx of money. I doubt there's. I would argue we're probably at critical mass on that anyway.
So Representative Jeter would like to go on record as supporting public financing of judicial campaigns?
I would like not to go on record for that.
Let's also talk about, there's a Senate proposal that would change local school board elections from nonpartisan to partisan. It hasn't been heard yet, but it seems like another attempt by state government to control local government, and as the quote goes, all politics is local. So is there a danger that we may see backlash against these proposals from the grassroots?
I hope so. It's who'd have thought 5 years ago it's going to be the Democrats that are constantly arguing for local communities, for local control. I've seen so many of these over the last few years. I can give you story after story. I probably respect the arguments from both sides a little more if they would just be honest about the reasons. It doesn't matter if it's in committee or on the floor. Kind of the big lie or the big dance I see both sides trying to claim is that their version of the map has absolutely nothing to do with electoral favorability, when everyone in the room, everyone in the public, they understand the absolute reason for it. I think there needs to be more local control over these decisions, or at the very least allow referendums so that the people in these cities can decide whether they want the Raleigh maps or not.
You know, the only thing I would be hesitant to is that bill has been filed in the House. It has not made it to the floor yet for a vote. And I think that let's not pass judgment on the House yet on that bill until we see whether or not it actually comes to a floor for a vote and it passes. I think there's more opposition to that bill within my own caucus. When it comes to educating our children, when it comes to making sure that school boards are making right decisions, anybody can file a bill, and I have the utmost respect for all 120 members of the General Assembly, and I don't begrudge anyone the right to file a bill. But just like I filed 41 bills, I'll acknowledge not all of them are perfect. And so, you know, I would say, as I've always said, judge us on what we pass, not at what is filed. So in 2 weeks, if that bill's filed, I think it's a different discussion. I think I have a different take on it. Right now, I'm hopeful that bill doesn't move.
And before we run out of time, let's talk about the Billy Graham statue in the U.S. Capitol. I know that was discussed today, and I know you've been pushing for it.
We had a fun debate today. It took about an hour and a half of time, and I certainly understand and appreciate and respect my colleagues. There's some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. We did have somewhat of a bipartisan vote in favor of it, but this was something that I had been working on for months with folks in Washington. I had been in touch with the architect of the Capitol to make sure we understood the process. I'd spoken to the Graham family, in particular Franklin Graham and others, and we really felt like this was the right choice. You know, I certainly regret that it played out like it did today, and I am glad the bill's passed. I think it's the right thing for the state.
Well, I'm not sure if it was mentioned, but this is Representative Jeter's bill, and I'd like to start with my favorite quote from the House floor today, as Representative Jeter stood in the back of the gallery and held the microphone and said, "Now y'all know that I'm long-winded, so that's the reason we're late in the studio today." A lot of the debate was about the process. To be honest, that wasn't the biggest issue for me. Mine really was a bit more substantive. I questioned whether we should put a religious figure in that position. Establishment Clause of the Constitution clearly says a government shouldn't favor a religion. And to me, all the case law seemed to be really on point. I mean, all the case law around it has to do with a statue or a religious ceremony in a government building. Now, clearly, the Capitol building is a government building. It's probably the one that most symbolizes our nation. Beyond that, the other greatest point I heard was from another representative that said more than half of North Carolina is female, 51.3%. I would like us to have considered a woman for that other statue.
The only thing I will say is there's two statues, and keep in mind, you know, that statue's been there since 1932. So, you know, over 70 years, over 80 years if I'm doing my South Carolina education math. You know, so over 80 years. So the premise that, you know, somehow I single-handedly have chosen this path or something to that effect, I don't think it really is a meritorious argument, not suggesting you're making it, but I think your actual argument about the separation of church and state's that's the discussion I was prepared to have. But you know, 80 years, this process could have been handled. To somehow say that this was rushed today, I think was unfair.
All right, well, that's all the time we have, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks.